Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves.
Mike just heard our intro music for the first time, and this comedian is laughing because it's awesome. All right, So this is Scott Groves On the Edge podcast. This is my friend and comedian Mike Eaton, and this is a rare time that I got to start the podcast making him laugh, so that's awesome. Mike is the host of a podcast called The Giggle Boys. He's been making his way in comedy. We'll say aspiring comic, right? For 3.5 years.
I do it.
you do it.
I'm aspiring to make good money at it.
Okay, he's aspiring to make money as a comedian. Good money. He makes some money, but Mike's basically paying his dues and doing that thing and doing the circuit. And he's hosted, shown up on shows with, and or tricked people into coming to his comedy hour. People like Tony Hinchcliffe, Jamie Kennedy, Punky Johnson, Ali Makovsky. Many of you who are here in Los Angeles or now in Austin have seen these people perform and open for a ton of people, and Mike's just working his way into that ecosystem. And so today we're going to hear everything that goes along with becoming a comic, right, Mike? You're going to tell us all the secrets?
Yeah. I mean, there's not really any secrets. That's the best part about being a comic, is everything is just so public. Like, I wish more people knew about it. I've tried to tell everyone.
And where are you right now as we're speaking?
I'm at my apartment in Austin. So my wife and I have an apartment here.
Yeah, so let's just get that out of the way. Everybody was quite shocked to hear that comedian and prankster and all-around good guy but strange guy Mike Eaton was able to get married to a woman who's absolutely lovely. I had the pleasure of meeting her, and she's normal and employed and beautiful, and it's like it's very confusing to many of us out here in California who are friends with you.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. When you know. We met at a wedding in August. Matt Duncan. We were at his wedding, and we met and we connected. We may or may not have done some substances and like looked at the stars in the middle of Colorado. It was great. It was just one of those wonderful times. And, I think 2020 was like a good year to really take to mind, like, you never know what the fuck is about to happen. So just follow your heart, do what makes you happy. Like, you might die tomorrow. 4,000 people, I think, died yesterday. Like, shit, man. Like, if I find someone that I love, I'm going to marry him. Like, that makes sense to me. So, and it made sense to her. So like, we're both the same kind of crazy, and it works out perfect.
And what's so far been the most surprising or the funny part about being married?
Like all the stuff that I do that people think is weird, like she likes. Like, one of the things she said that just like blew my fucking mind is she like looked at me with like really big, like loving eyes. And she said, "I love when you go on your high rants." Like, when I get high and rant about something, she just loves that shit. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. That's crazy.
Match made in heaven.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It's just that it's cool to be with someone that loves like who I am as a person. Cause like you said, I'm a strange guy. Like, I'm pretty weird. Like, any of my comedy, like, if you dare to look it up on the internet, my lawyer has asked me to remove most of it from the internet. But like, if you happen to seek it out, like, it's, pretty zany and graphic stuff. So like, for someone to love that, like, got to be a special kind of person.
So let's go there, since you mentioned it. Like, your lawyer asked you to remove some stuff from the internet. Growing up, I was watching stuff way, way age inappropriate. And for context, I'm 42, or I'll be 42 here in a couple weeks. And I remember, like, at 10 or 11 years old, watching the Sam Kinison pay-per-views, with my dad and his friends and my uncles. And I think I probably watched Eddie Murphy Raw for the first time on VHS when I was a preteen or teenager. Please, guys, don't judge my parents. I'm sure I was sneaking around doing this. But I'm sure comedy has changed, but I felt like growing up, like, nothing was off limits in comedy. You could say anything, do anything, make fun of anybody, and everybody knew it was in jest. So, I know that you've been a student of comedy for 15 years, and you've been doing it professionally for 3.5, making the rounds. What changes, if any, have you seen in the comedy world?
That's interesting. I think like there's always been like a very progressive nature to comedy. Like, like part of, I mean, like the history of it even, I geek out about that kind of shit. And I read about just quotes from like old, very smart people. And like Oscar Wilde has something along the lines of like, if you want to tell people something, you have to make them laugh. Otherwise they'll murder you. And it's just like, like it's always been known, like people that watch, this was a statistic I read the other day, but people that watch The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and the show with John Oliver and the Colbert Report all tested higher on being able to detect like subjective news, like bias and shit like that. So like people that were watching these funny shows were actually learning better. So like there's always been a progressive nature to comedy, and there's always been something about pushing the bounds. What I think is starting to happen now is that because there is such a direct connection between everybody and the performers, and everyone has such a loud voice on the internet, like you can piss off these very small and vocal groups, and people get the impression that everyone is turned into a bunch of snowflakes. But like if you go to the Comedy Store or you go to any of these major venues, I mean, I've been at the Vulcan a few times here, which is like one of the big venues that's doing comedy shows. Like you can hear some pretty heinous, not PC, offensive stuff, and nobody's like going up after the show to the comedian like, hey, I'm gonna fucking murder you. Like that's just not like, no, there might be a tweet from somebody that gets 1,000 likes. There's fucking 380 million people. Like 1,000 likes is fucking nothing,
Yeah.
So I don't think comedy has really changed as much. We just see more of the bullshit now.
Well, I don't know if you recall, because we may have had one too many cocktails the night that we were there, but you and I went to the Ice House in Pasadena. Yeah, maybe one too many cocktails. Speaking of which, tonight, in case people are following along, I'm still drinking this Four Roses small batch whiskey, which is awesome, and an Atabey cigar, which is like my new favorite, Atabey, Atabey. Never heard of them before. Our friend Cole Strange turned me on to them. They're freaking awesome. So anyway, you and I went to a comedy show after many, many drinks and maybe some other extracurricular activities. And we saw Joe Rogan perform. And at the Joe Rogan show in the front row were two gay men and a transsexual. And the jokes did not limit themselves.
No, they were gay. They weren't trans. It was two gay guys. They were like a couple that was holding hands at the beginning, right?
No, there was the big trans lady, the blonde hair, good looking woman or guy. I'm not sure if she had transitioned. Remember, she was in the front row. She was beautiful. I was like, oh wow, and she was egging Joe on. Like she wanted more jokes. She wanted more acceptance. Like I said, we were a little out of it that night. But I just remember going up and talking to him afterwards. I don't know what the correct vernacular is. Sorry, I don't know if she had transitioned or not, or how she wants to be called. I don't know what the PC thing to do is. But she had no problem with it. She thought it was hilarious. She was there amongst the people having a great time. And it feels like in comedy, really nothing should be off limits. But to your point, there's some really vocal people. So does that temper the jokes that you're willing to tell, or does that temper, what's off limits, on limits? Like, does it change what you think about comedy?
Well, I mean, like, I'll tell you that, like, the jokes that I make with my close friends in comedy, like in person when we're sitting around and shooting the shit, are a shade darker than what I say on stage, because I know that they're not going to be offended because they know me. But like, one of the things I temper my jokes to make people laugh. So whatever makes people laugh, you got to be more funny than you are mean. And I think that the number one thing that one of the things, like, I have a joke about Grindr, the gay dating app, and I had already found it funny because so many gay men had told me about how many times they'd use it to get laid. But then working with Chris, I sat down with Chris at that hotel in Arizona and interviewed him and like took notes for like 20 fucking minutes. It's like I wanted to learn and come at it from a place of making fun of something, not from a place of being an outsider, haha, like you're gay, but like hey, no, this is crazy. Do you guys know about this? Because I didn't know about it. I know about everything. So like, I think that like, as long as you're doing that, you can say some pretty crazy stuff. People forget Ralphie May put out a comedy special, and he has a whole joke where the premise of the joke is that if we replaced racial slurs with really delicious cookies by the same names, then they would take the power away from those racial slurs. And he says every racial slur under the sun over and over and over again. And everybody was fine with it. Nobody gave a shit. And it's because it, like, at the time we weren't as PC aggressive. Something started around the time of Louis C.K. jerking off on all those chicks, where people were like, no, like, comedians are terrible people. And then anything bad they did, they're like, well, they're probably also jerking off on chicks. And so like, like there's been definitely a turn there. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think you need to use racial slurs to make jokes. Like, I have never used that on stage because it's just like, it's not funny. It's never funnier than it is mean. Like no one has a new original joke about a racial slur that's been around that long. So like that maybe has changed where you don't see that as much nowadays, which I think is fine. But as far as like out there crazy concepts, I mean, there are some really just out there. I mean, I just talked to Jeremiah Watkins, and he was just here at the Vulcan, and he has a new special called Family Reunion. And at his special at the filming, he did it in his hometown, and his family came out, and he did incest jokes in front of his entire family. Like, I mean, no one's stopping that. And it's fucking great. Like it's an awesome and hilarious special. It's been well received. People are jamming on it. Like, I mean, it's not all the people that are saying like it's PC, you can't say anything anymore. Like, I think those are people that just really want to say the N-word.
Yeah, and they want to complain, right?
I get the vibe of that.
I mean, you nailed it, right? You said never be meaner than you are funny, right? Because then you're just going into political commentary or satire, or you're going to a really dark place. But if you're trying to be funny, I think people can tell if that comes from the right place. Do me a favor, tell us what it is to be a comedian, right? Because as you know, I'm born and raised here in LA, and the thing out here is everybody's an actor, right? So I would talk to somebody growing up and be like, oh, what do you do? And they're like, I'm an actor. I'm like, oh, what have you been in? Well, I've got an agent. And I'm like, oh, what have you been booked on? And they're like, well, I took some headshots. And I'm like, oh, so basically you had a photo shoot and now you're calling yourself an actor. If somebody calls themselves a comedian, or a professional comedian, what does that even mean? Like, what do? Do you guys have a union? Do you guys have to sign a card? Do you have to change your status on Facebook? Like, what does it mean to be a comedian?
So, it's a thing like actor or musician or, podcaster. You are because you say you are. Like it's there's every varying degree of that. Like Joe Rogan can very easily say he's a podcaster the same way he can say he's a comedian, the same way he can say that he's like a jujitsu badass because he does that shit. Like, but like you can just go and do comedy once and tell everybody you're a comedian. Like I tell people, so I say that I've been doing comedy and like, it's hard to count because of the fucking pandemic, but I started taking comedy really seriously in May of 2018. And I felt embarrassed that I'd called myself a comedian before that because I'd done like 6 open mics. I was writing shit all the time in my little journal. And like, I have an Evernote that dates back to like 2016, 2015 before I did comedy for the first time. And like, I have like a bunch of notes there, but like I don't think it was genuine to call myself a comedian before I really started going to mics and trying to get on shows. And like, a good metric for how far along someone is in their career talent wise is what kind of shows they're doing, how long of time they're performing. That's one kind of thing that people don't realize is that, when you see that comedian do 30 minutes on stage or an hour long thing on stage, that takes a long time to build up a polished hour. Like if it's a good hour long thing, that's taken, probably years for them to go and workshop all the jokes and cut all of the fat and get rid of all the unnecessary details and riff off of things and expect what's going to happen in the crowd to riff off of that. Like that takes a long time. So for me, like I'm at a stage where I've been doing it, 2.5, almost 3 years, like actively. And I have probably 30 minutes of jokes, but they don't all go in a row. Like if I had to go do 30 minutes, I would have to stretch it out. There'd be some fat in there, like just being perfectly honest. But like if I'm doing 10 minutes, I can crush that because I've got a great couple of 10 minutes, So like, that's where I'm at in my career. Like I get paid gigs to go and do that 10 minutes on showcases. One of the other things that I get paid for that really helped me was hosting. It's a lot of people see it as a different skill than comedy because you do have to still do stand-up comedy when you're hosting, but you also have to control the energy of the room in between other comedians. You got to get like, the atmosphere started and make it, you can't go up there and like completely destroy with crazy zany shit and just be like wild and out of control. Like you got to go up there with big energy and get some good laughs, but you got to warm people up and like let them know they can laugh at some fucked up shit, but you don't take them all the way there right at the beginning. Like I would never do like a pedophile joke to open up a show as a host, but like I might do that if I was, doing a 15-minute headliner spot. I might put that in the middle because it's fun to do crazy jokes and see what you can get people to laugh at. But so like that's where like being a comedian is just going and doing comedy, whether you're professional or not. Just means, do you get money to perform? And like right now it's such a weird time because there's so few gigs that like, hardly anybody is making a living off of live stand-up comedy right now.
Yeah, that's something that I had to understand, when you moved out here to LA and we became such closer friends and I went to a bunch of your gigs. In my mind, stand-up is like Dave Chappelle, Seinfeld, Tom Segura doing a super polished hour in front of a crowd of 10,000 people. And the reason, because this isn't my genre, right? Like it makes sense. In my mind, it's like, that's what comedy is. You do an hour, you either kill it or you suck, and people, but then when I started watching you, it's like, we drive all the way across town to see you do 3 minutes at a gig. And I was like, wait, what? He got up there and did like 2 jokes. Like I hear more of that around the office, when Mike stops by for lunch, but you're right. It's like any other skill set, Michael Jordan didn't just all of a sudden show up at the NBA. There was a lot of time behind the scenes working on stuff, writing in his journal, taking free throw shots. And so, is it normal for a new comedian or somebody that's trying to get that open mic to like what's the hustle? Are they once a night, twice a night? Are they getting 2 minutes? Are they writing 10 hours a day for jokes? I can't even conceptualize what that day looks like or how that work starts. Can you kind of walk us through like what does it mean to be new and get 3 minutes on stage?
Well, so like there's a lot of varying degrees of it, and there's no one right way to do it. There's some people that don't do a shit ton of mics and don't develop a bunch of material, but are very friendly and run good shows and, have that way of doing comedy. Like there's some people that write prolifically and perform prolifically, and it's also hard to answer that too, because things are very, very, very different now. Like comedy is one of the things that was, just wiped out by the pandemic. Like when you think about the things that are shut, bars and restaurants, in-person gatherings of people, anything indoors. Like these are all the things that you need for comedy. Like most comedy doesn't happen at comedy clubs. It happens at things that aren't comedy clubs. Like until you are a big name person, you're not really performing at comedy clubs. That's a rite of passage that you have to earn. So like if you're, only a year or 2 or 3, 5 years in, depending on, how good you are, like you're still doing a lot of bar shows and like those are gone. So, in February of this year, of last year. So, gosh, 2021. Geez.
Already here, 2021. So February of 2020.
I know. February of 2020, I was doing like 7 to 10 mics or shows a week.
Do me a favor.
Like
explain
a combination
to the people,
of like.
Do me a favor. Explain to the people that aren't in this ecosystem. What is a mic? What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's an open mic. So there are a bunch of different kinds of open mics. There's some like a lot of people tend to think of like an open mic they've seen at a bar where someone comes up and sings, someone does poetry or some shit. I don't do that. That's not the mics that I do. There are comedy open mics where no matter what skill level you are, your first fucking time or you've been doing it however long, like there's still pros that go and check into them. Joey Diaz very famously every now and then goes to just like the shittiest shithole open mics that he can find just to keep himself humble. So like, there's just so many different places from coffee shops. I've done them in boba shops. I've done them in libraries. I did it in a storage unit behind a Food for Less in LA. I've done them on rooftops of hotels. They're everywhere. Anywhere that will let you set up an amp and a microphone, comedians are trying to do comedy there because they just want to get better at it. And it's the only craft that you have to have other people to do. And the weird thing is like 90% of it, like when you're starting off, you're just doing comedy to other comedians. So like you got to really bring it to make them laugh. Cause like we think about shit that's funny, but even if like you're telling us funny jokes and they're not that good, like we're just going to sit there and be like, oh, it's funny, but we're not going to laugh. And like, there is nothing more deafening than the sound of silent stares when you're on stage trying to say something funny. Cause it's such a vulnerable position to put yourself in. Like think about in conversations when you said something that was just like a little too fucked up and everybody's like, you know what I'm talking about? Totally. Like that. Now do that with 50 people. Now do it with 400, and like, it's just like the scale, like of the magnitude, just like, what? It's such a crazy feeling. Like when I'm not doing well on stage, I sweat so much. It is insane. Like even sometimes when I am doing well on stage, just the pressure and excitement of being up there, I sweat a lot. But like, it's grueling when it doesn't go well. And you have to not do well at it to figure out how to do well at it. Like you have to do it badly to ever even do it kind of good.
Yeah.
Like,
you said something in there I think is so interesting. It's like one of the few skill sets, maybe the only one, where it's like you can't practice, right? Like you can't look in the mirror and just tell jokes and be like, yeah, they're going to laugh at that one. You've got to be in front of an audience, whether they're sober or drunk or at a coffee shop. I know you did that one big comedy show, about 50 people showed up to like just the back room in a pizza joint, right? And it was like, hey, go hustle some guy at a pizza joint and be like, I'll get 50 people here to buy pizza and beer if you let me use your stage in the back and I'll bring a mic. And I was like, yep, this is the hustle of like the struggling comedian who's just trying to make it. And ironically, you had some great people showed up there. You had some pros that have done big 1 hour specials, and they showed up because, to your point, like everybody just needs that audience to get better. And that's brutal because in COVID, you can't really get an audience together.
Well, and the other thing too about it is that like some of the stuff that is available, Zoom comedy is not the same as doing stand-up comedy. The response time and everything, it's just not the same. Like it's a little bit, but it's the difference between jerking off and sex. Like they're just like one is a means to an end and one is actually like really enjoyable. So like doing outdoor shows, the other thing about those can be fun, but the comedy is best in a dark room where people have had 2 or 3 drinks. There's, like a close feeling. Everybody's hunched in together, but not too tight. And then there's a light with an elevated performer. That's the perfect setup for comedy, 50 to 100 people. I've listened to 6,000 hours of podcasts with comedians talking about their favorite shit. And that's like universally the most loved. And also having people that are avid comedy fans, like that's a big part of it. Is you just want to have everybody, one, they can't feel embarrassed to laugh at those jokes. Like you can't be out in the light, like it's just like, you can see me laughing at what he just said. Like, no. And like 2, like laughter is super contagious. There's an energy. You've spoken on stage. Anybody that's ever done any kind of public speaking or done any kind of presenting knows that feeling of the energy in the room. And you can feel when something's funny and entertaining or engaging, or the sales pitch is going well, or they're biting into what you're saying, or when it's waning. Like you can feel like the energy suck out of the room when you're starting to fall flat, or the numbers have gone on too long, or the joke's not making sense. And like having to be able to simultaneously talk, say the piece of the joke, say the story, and measure all of that energy, like that, that's a big part of comedy. But like that energy needs to be contained in a room. Like when you take the roof off, it just leaks out into the atmosphere. So you need that tight end space, and just drinking makes everything better. So like, you need those recipes, and you can't do any of that in COVID.
Yeah. That's
so
brutal.
that's what's frustrating. So like now, it's nice to do a gig a week. It's hard to say, is it worth the risk of going out and exposing myself, exposing my wife, exposing my mom, if I go and see her, like, having to quarantine if I'm following all the rules, to go out and wait for 3 hours to do 5 minutes to 20 comedians that don't give a shit and want to see me fail because I just moved to Austin from LA. Like that, like, is that worth it? I mean, I say, yeah, about once or twice a week, but it's not worth doing every single day right now. Cause it's just like, man, like I'll wait for a show, and then I get to do shows, every now and then. And it's really fun. And the people that are coming out right now for comedy are just so encouraging, and it's so great. So anything that happens, even though it's not ideal conditions, like people are like, they need to laugh. It's important.
Yeah, I agree. And so if that's the case, right, you can either go back to when you were here in LA doing a grind, driving from Newport to LA out to Azusa to try to get these mics in and hit, 10 spots a week so you can get on stage for 2 to 5 minutes so you can, maybe get an hour of quality time of your craft. What does the rest of the day look like besides drinking? What does the rest of the day look like as far as like, do you write jokes? Do you watch podcasts? Like, how does one come up with the material for comedy?
So there's a lot of ways. Like my personal thing is I consume a bunch of different kinds of art. Everything, like music, comedy, podcasts. I listen to just an insane amount of stand-up because I spend a lot of time driving. Like especially in LA, because living out there in Azusa, it was an hour to downtown LA or Hollywood, or like 45 to an hour to Huntington Beach. And like I was performing all over there and going to all these little spots. and doing 2 or 3 a night. So I was driving a bunch. So I would just listen to someone's hour special and just listen to it over and over again. And you start to get a feel for how people put stories together. And then for me, it's just when I get, I'll naturally say something funny in conversation, or something funny will strike me about something in the news, or it'll get me thinking. I have like 5 minutes of jokes about the rapper T.I. And that also started because I like read that news article about T.I. being very protective of his daughter's virginity and saying some very weird, like just kind of outdated stuff and like just kind of uneducated stuff. Like he said, like he doesn't let his daughter do gymnastics because he wants her to keep her hymen. And so everybody was like, hey, T.I., that's not really any of your business. And also that's insane. And so I was reading about that and I was like, man, that's pretty fucking crazy. I wonder what else, like if he says shit like that, like what's T.I. been up to? And then I learned a bunch of shit about T.I. And then like through some stories of my own and then some like kind of creative liberties and like putting together, now I have this joke where I talk about T.I. And like that was the comedic process there. But from the day that I learned about that to the day that was like a good 5-minute joke, that probably took 6 months. Whereas like there are some things where I had like a personal experience where I would go through something. One of the stories that you heard when we first started hanging out, when we first met, was a story called the Cock Goblin. And it was just like a very grotesque experience that I had been through. And I added like a couple things to it creatively over time, but I mean, it was just a very real, crazy story. And I mean, eventually I worked that into something to do on stage. And it's just, there's all sorts of ways to get it. But like most of my day is spent listening to podcasts, listening to comedy, watching funny stuff, talking to funny people. And then just like, I think about the jokes. I listen to my comedy a shit ton. That's the other thing that I do like an insane amount of. I just listen to my sets and I listen to the people in the room. And because I have like a very emotional response during comedy, like it's a very deeply seated memory. Like people like often like see comedians years later be like, how the fuck do you remember me from that show? And they'll remember what joke you laughed at, because we're fucking obsessive about all the shit that happens up there. Like I wish I had video at everyone. I'm just not to the place of that yet, but I go and I listen to audio all the time and like everything I do, and I listen to it, like if it's a really good one, I'll listen to it like 50 times. And if it's like a bad one, I'll listen to it like 70. So like
when you're re-listening to your own shows, you've got 3-5 minutes on stage, you record it on your iPhone or whatever. When you're re-listening that, are you listening for the crowd's response, for your timing, for the words you use? Like where's the fine tuning, right? Like where's the polishing of the act really come into play?
So like when I'm up on stage, like I said, like it's like a very emotional thing. Like you get kind of like a fight or flight response. And so like, it takes like a lot of getting up on stage. Like you might not believe this, but growing up, I was very shy.
I do not believe that. You are the most outgoing. I do not believe that at all. You are the most outgoing, gregarious person I know.
I know. Ask my mom. That's all just a force of like hating that about myself and like hating that I didn't have like the courage to talk to people and just like taking it like way the other way. But like, I was like shy and was just like, I didn't want to talk to people. So like, I still get like a lot of anxiety about going. I mean, I do have anxiety, so that's part of why I get it. But like, I freak the fuck out. Like there's probably been 50 occasions where I've been outside before a show, like throwing up from anxiety, and then like gone and crushed it. Like it's not like a oh no, I'm not funny anymore. It's like oh God, what's gonna happen? Because every time's a fucking coin flip. I've had great sets. Like it's every time's a coin flip. So, like it's, I don't know, man. It's tough to say.
I honestly don't even remember what the original question was. I just love to hear you rant. Oh yeah, this one.
Yeah, me either. I'm also pretty high.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, I figured you might have had a couple partaking of the e-cigarette before we got on, but no, the question was like what does the day look like, right? Like how much time do you spend writing jokes? Do you have 5 bullet points in your Evernote, or do you have 5,000 pages of weird stuff? Yeah. See, we both got sidetracked. I'm drinking, you're smoking. It's bad.
And that question was asked 5 minutes ago.
And that question was asked 5 minutes ago. It's fine. It's fine. This is why we do podcasts, right? So we just keep talking and ranting.
Hell yeah. So like the way that I do it is I write notes down. I have like a couple of big long running notes that are like, I have one that like dates back to like 2015. I don't add to that one very much anymore because it's just so full and laborious to scroll, but I go read through it all the time. But I have like 4 or 5 of these big long Evernotes, like full of jokes. And then for every set that I go do, I try and plan out like what jokes I want to do that time. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes something happens on stage or something like pops in my head, or I just get like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this. But that's why I listen to it, because like I write it down. I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is how I want these jokes to go together. Because it's all puzzle pieces. Like a lot of stuff starts with like just like a funny sentence or a funny idea, and then you got to like extrapolate. And how do you set that up? How do you present that so that it's funny? Like, you know, there's any topic, if you break it down, you can find something funny about it. So like, you figure out how you can make whatever you think is funny, and then you put your spin on it and you put your flavor on it. So I listen to it a lot. So my writing process, like for that, is like my editing process is I listen to the jokes. I listen to how people react to them. I listen to what I say. And it's also like, you know, when you get into an argument with somebody and you're in the shower afterwards, you're like, I fucking should have said this shit. Like you could have totally won the argument, or you're in like thinking about a sales thing and you're like, I forgot that. That happens on that's comedy too. Like, oh man, it'd been so much funnier if I said this. So you hear all that and you're reliving the experience, but by having the step away from it, you know, just listening to the audio, not reliving it completely, your brain is able to think in that like kind of more comedic, like, well, what's better about this? What's funny about this? What's unnecessary? What are you saying just for the benefit of yourself? Like, is it detrimental to keep that in there? Because there's some shit I just like to say for me. I think it's funny. I have a stupid fucking accent that I do every now and then. It shows. It's terrible. It's a dumb pirate joke, but I like it a lot. And so like there's some shit that's just for me, but like most of the time it's just figuring out what makes it funny and how to make it the best that it can be. So that's what the writing process is. So it's going into Evernote and then going and testing that set out, going, you know, if I have like a typical day would, like in LA would be, I would go to, they have these places where you can pay $5 to do 5 minutes, and it's an hour-long time block. You sign up online, you show up, there's 10 people there, you all go up to your 5 minutes, you have like a pre-listed order, and you just go and you rip them out. So I would go and do that to kind of get the words out of my mouth, just to get the juices flowing and to like work on some stuff with my friends. Then we would drive to the next place, and there would be like a real bar mic where there'd be, you know, 15, 20 audience members, and we'd do that. And then one of us would have a show, and we'd go to the show and we'd all listen to our friends do jokes, or we'd do the jokes. And then we'd all talk about that over drinks or food or whatever. And then, you know, hopefully one of us would have another show, or we'd find some other trash mic to do at the end of the night. So you could do 4 or 5 in a night like that some nights.
Interesting.
But,
you know, you and I saw
that's what the process looks like. And then you go and listen to all that.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the wordplay and the revisions, because you and I saw Tony Hinchcliffe do this joke, and I can't even remember the joke. I just remember we saw him at a couple shows in a row where he changed the punchline to the joke to like, and the mom was driving a minivan, or the mom was driving a Prius, or the mom was driving a whatever. And you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that joke like 10 times. He's trying to nail in like what car at the end of the joke will get more laughs. And I'm like, oh, so this dude like conceptualized this thought process, then he tried to turn it into a joke, and now he's had to drive across town 10 different times to give the same freaking joke, just changing one word, like what is the car that the mom shows up in, to see what gets the most laughs.
Well, he's probably changing a bunch of different ones too. That's the benefit of doing longer times, is like, you know, it becomes like it's a Rubik's Cube. Like you're just doing like a whole series of which one is the funniest. You know, like gross exaggeration is usually very funny. So saying something that's way bigger or smaller or crazier or lamer than you would think, like that, you just try it. There's a comedian, Ari Shafir, that's very funny, that had a joke where he says he didn't wash his sheets for 7 months. And then like after he says the joke, he's like, and 7 months is not really how long I go, but it's the longest I can say without the audience getting grossed out. So it's like, you know, he went and tested and said, first he probably just said the true time. People were like, the fuck? And then he probably was like 2 months, and people were like, well, that's not that gross. And then like he just picked until he found what people were responding to. And then also like, you know, it's just like anything, like no one's a fucking robot. Like nobody has like everything verbatim word for word. Like, well, somebody does, I'm sure. You can't nobody nothing, but like most people don't have every single fucking word verbatim planned out of how it's going to come out on stage. Just because that would get stale, that's not responsive or receptive to the crowd. There's no energy or love in like having a conversation that's completely just recorded,
Yeah. Who's the greatest in your mind? Like who's the best right now, or the greatest of all time, or who do you go like, oh, I remember you saying a couple times, like, watching this person do comedy just makes me want to quit because they're so good. I'll never be that good. Like who's the best right now, and or the greatest of all time, or whatever?
I get that feeling specifically very strongly about Dave Chappelle, John Mulaney, and Daniel Tosh. Daniel Tosh hadn't released an album in a while, which fucking sucks, but I mean, everything John Mulaney and Dave Chappelle do, they're both very, very, very different. But it's just every single word is so perfect, and everything that they do pushes so many envelopes and does it in the right way and is received so well. And like, it's something like, John Mulaney is something where I can send my mom, and even if he makes a sex joke, I don't feel uncomfortable because he's just such a funny, approachable person, and the writing is just so good. And Dave Chappelle is like, I mean, he's unbelievable, but just not only as a comedian, but as like just a mouthpiece and like, like a philosopher, the way that he speaks and does stuff like, I don't mean to put him on a pedestal, but for my craft, I think he's the greatest to ever do it. Like I've never seen anybody, especially like the stuff that he has on Netflix. Like when you watch that from a place of understanding how much time and effort it takes to get good at having an hour, and then to watch a guy that's gotten so fucking good at it that he could go up there and just completely riff off the top of his head, and it's better than anything anyone else spent 5 years working on. That's insane. And he brings up incredible stuff from history and pop culture, and you're learning, and like he steps on some boundaries, but it's just so, I mean, that's everything that I aspire to be one day in comedy. And he does it in a way that looks so effortless because he's been doing it since he was like fucking 15. I mean, it's incredible the amount of hours this guy's put into it. So I would say like he's the GOAT. But John Mulaney and Daniel Tosh both make me feel that way too, because their punchlines are just so crisp. And Daniel Tosh says just terrible stuff, and you can't be mad at him. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's something so likable about that guy. He's just like, shucks, the neighbor next door that used to mow your grass. He seems like such a likable guy, and then he can say the most horrific shit ever, and you're like, oh, dude, that was pretty funny. I can't even be mad at you. What is the what is the difference? Because when I think of Chappelle, for example, and maybe you can explain this distinction to me because I don't know what good comedy is per se, other than what makes me laugh. Chappelle just seems to be telling stories, and then the story like magically turns into this rock star joke where I'm like, holy shit, I see what you were doing there, and now I can, like, now my side hurts, I'm laughing so hard. Where I feel like Tosh and Mulaney are a little bit more like, maybe that's a little bit like, that was a zinger. Like, I saw that was coming, but I appreciate the punchline. That was pretty funny. Like, is there a difference? Am I making this up in my head between, like, the storyteller and, like, the knock-knock joke type of guy?
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that I think makes stand-up so interesting, too, is that there's, like, no wrong way to do it if people are laughing. I mean, like, Jeff Dunham does fucking puppet comedy. I hate him. I probably hate him because I'm jealous because he figured out he just says awful racist shit, but he does it with a puppet of the race that he is making fun of. And then that race is not offended by it. Like that's his loophole. And then you have other people that are just like strict, like Mitch Hedberg, one of the greatest to ever do it. His jokes are timeless. You can go listen to Strategic Grill Locations right now and laugh your fucking ass off. And it's like a 15-year-old album. And it feels like something that would be unbelievable. It came out today. He told a lot of one-liners. And one of the keys to his success was that it was so repeatable. I mean, this was an age before memes. So people were just telling each other jokes. Like, you remember, like, for a long time, the height of comedy was just saying Anchorman quotes to each other. So, like, like there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And there's storytellers. There's people like Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura who are telling these long stories that are punched up and have funny stuff along the way. And then you're like, how did you get there? You have Dave Chappelle that's more like a contemporary comedian. Like, he's talking about what's happening in context with his life and telling you a long overarching narrative that's peppered with stories, and there's there's a arch here, but then there's this all the ways that he gets to it and pulls from it, and that's what makes it so masterful. But there's a zillion different ways to do it. I mean, there's people that are just like crowd work comedians that get up there and they just ask people questions in the audience and they make fun of what's going on with the interaction, and then pepper in kind of semi-prepared stuff with whatever they're saying and wherever they're from. I mean, there's a zillion different kinds of comedy, and like there's not one right way. It's just finding what you like.
Yeah, I remember showing up one time for my ex-wife actually bought us tickets to Adam Carolla, and she hated Adam Carolla, but she was being a trooper, and she knew that I was a fan of like his radio show. This is before podcast. This is when he took over for a very brief time for Howard Stern on the radio before he said some shit that got him kicked off, which was pretty funny. And so we went to one of his comedy shows, and he showed up, and he said, honestly, guys, I had a long day at work. I don't want to do this fucking show. Like, I'm here because I'm contractually obligated to, but I appreciate you guys showing up. I have no prepared material. How about you guys just give me stuff from the audience that you don't think I would have any chance of complaining about, and I'll complain about it. And so for an hour and a half, he just took, like, I mean, people in the audience were like, Mother Teresa. And he would go off for 10 minutes on how horrible Mother Teresa was, you know? And he was just...
Yeah, she was a bitch.
He was... Well,
fuck her.
I think his point was that she kept everybody in poverty to feel better about herself. But, I mean, he was just nailing it. And the improv skills were just something that I was like, oh, that's a different kind of comedy. That's not what we showed up for. But it was hilarious nonetheless, right? And he just could not be stopped that night. He was so angry and so grumpy and so didn't want to be there. Like, the anger and the fury for anything... I mean, I remember one lady was like, oh, my 3-year-old toddler's so cute. Tell me something you hate about him. And I won't repeat what he said, but holy shit, I laughed so hard. I think I spilled my beer. It was horrendous. So it's interesting that there's so many different types of comedy. What's the stuff that, like, what are you working on? Like, are you working on more of that long form storytelling? Are you working on like the one-liner zingers? Or are you more of like an improv guy where you just feel the audience? Like what's your motif?
So right now what I have like a bunch of are just like 1 to 5 minute chunks of funny stuff. Sometimes it's like short but sweet. Like I have like a handful of short jokes, but like the goal too also like is there is like you can do all of that. Like sometimes like you can throw one-liners in there with the middle of it. There's a guy, Neil Brennan, that has a special on Netflix called 3 Mics. And he has 3 microphones set up on the stage in like center, middle, and left. And 1 mic is for stand up, 1 mic is for emotional thoughts, and 1 mic is for one-liners. So he'll do like parts, the light come on, and he's at another mic. And so like what I'm working on is really just making as much funny shit as I can, polishing as much of the stuff that I know to be funny, and just building as much time as I can and figuring out how it goes together. Like if you put it all on a spreadsheet, you know, I would have like, I don't know, probably 75, 80 of these things that are jokes. And they range from like 1 to 5 minutes pretty much. And they all have like some basic, like 2 to 3 word explainer of what they are. And then they have like tags that go with them in a specific order to set up something. If you put all those pieces together, you can just like Jenga block them. You can try and find stuff that naturally transitions into one another. You know, like sometimes you hear comedians say like, I was at the store the other day. They weren't at the store. I mean, at some point they were at that store or maybe not, but they just want to tell you the joke about the store. Like they needed to transition there because that's a natural conversational way to like bring up a new thought. But like, you know, if I have a joke about like Subway and I do like a Subway joke because like the crowd is kind of raunchy, then I know that goes really well into my joke about Jeffrey Epstein. Like I can relate those two together. But if the Subway joke is going really bad, then like I can completely change gears with that and go into a nicer joke. I don't have a lot of those because I'm not like a nicer joke kind of guy. I'm still, most of my shit's just not PG-13 even. It's just stuff like, it's very true. And my life hasn't been very PG-13. The stuff that I have experience with, like I'm not going to make up and do like clean jokes from like a perspective that I don't understand. Like I live a pretty hard life. I have a lot of fun. You know, I do crazy stuff and I say crazy things. And a lot of most of the first thoughts that I have to say out loud to people are fucking awful. But, you know, there's a group of us that really appreciate that and don't take any harm from it, you know, and that's who I'm writing for. So
how does one decide to make that jump? Because I know you to be an intelligent guy. Maybe the motivation's not there, but I know you could do a sales job. You could do a corporate job. You could do a $100,000 a year XYZ, sit in a cubicle job and be successful. Like, where does the decision come? You know, you said you've been taking this really seriously for 3.5 years, so I'm sure the thought was on your mind before that. Where does the decision come to be like, yeah, instead of this corporate job, instead of living what like this American dream is, I think I'm going to make $5 per event to learn how to say horrible things about people and make people laugh with it. Like where the fuck does that even come from?
Well, like I was a class clown. That was like one of the ways that I could communicate. Like I didn't really talk with a lot of people outside of stuff, but I could be funny and I could say stuff. And I've always been witty. I've been a big smart ass. My dad's a funny guy. My mom's a pretty funny lady too, honestly. Like I just had funny people. And laughter is a coping mechanism. Like, I'm like a naturally like pretty depressed person. So I can figure out how to be happy in spite of that. So like, the motivation to go and do comedy and give that my everything happened. Something woke up inside me the first time I did it, where, it's, the same feeling. The reason I knew I could marry Brittany the night that I met her. Like, it's just like when I know something in my gut, like I know it and I can't unknow that thing. Like I knew doing like corporate job that I wasn't happy, but I remember I felt so lost and aimless all the time. And I had a great job and I was making great money. I had a new car. I had, a great apartment. I was playing volleyball with friends. I was going to shows, having a good time outside looking in. My Instagram was great, but like, I was just not happy at the end of the day. And I was lonely and I was bored and I didn't feel fulfillment in anything that I was doing. And I could really notice the change about 6 months after I started it, because there was a distinct change of what the overall anxiety I had about in life. Like, there's always just this thing before of what am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? Why am I even here? And then it changed to, why didn't I start this sooner? And like, just that change, it's like, that's such a distinct shift in what, like, our fears tell us a lot about who we are, and like what our anxiety and worries are about tell us a lot about like where we're going. So like, I'm realizing like I wanted to start this sooner because this is what I was meant to do. And when I get up on stage and I make any money from it, it means the fucking world to me. Like I make these dumb t-shirts that have my tattoo on them because it's a funny tattoo of a snake that says I made him a snake. I make those and I see someone buy that and I see someone post a picture of them wearing that. I make like $4 fucking, but that feels better than any paycheck I've ever gotten. Like having friends come out and see me at a show and like laugh and tell me what they liked afterwards, that feels better than any compliment I've ever gotten at a job. Like, I could go do a sales job, like I could do normal work and it's fine and it's good. Like, it's just none of that even comes close to feeling even slightly as good as having a joke go great on stage. Like I've done all of the drugs, like literally everything basically. And nothing even comes close to having a joke kill.
Interesting. You said you're naturally kind of prone to depression, and the comedy or the class clown stuff is a coping mechanism. What, and this is a broad statement, and I know we're going to stereotype and we're going to probably piss some people off. What percentage of comedians do you think are clinically depressed, coping through comedy with pick whatever, depression, drug addiction, alcoholism, whatever. Like, I've hung out with a lot of comedians thanks to you, and they seem like a pretty emotionally broken group of people. And I'm not judging because I work in the mortgage industry where there's a lot of people who are also emotionally broken and sadly doing a lot of drugs and doing a lot of things they shouldn't be doing. But what percentage of comedians, like, they've got a rough shtick going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, like, we have a really high rate of suicide. That's like a thing. Like, that shit happens a lot. But like, here's one of the things that like I think, like, if you just break this all down to like neuroscience, like, we get a dopamine rush from shit that we enjoy, and everybody's brain is wired a little bit different to get that rush from whatever they really like. Some people super like money, some people super like sex, some people super like attention from a group of strangers, some people need validation and constant validation from others. Like, some people need a mixture of those things. Some people thrive on just variety, some people thrive on just the idea of stability and security, and then it relates to one of those other things. So like, if you look at comedians, like, what we love the most is having a bunch of people affirm the thought that we are funny. And like, not as 100% of the time, but as a general rule, like, if you need that kind of affirmation and validation about a characteristic such as being funny that you have proof for, that's just like a self-esteem thing. I think most people have self-esteem issues. I mean, realistically, it's very rare that I meet people that genuinely like themselves. And usually when I meet people that seem like they really like themselves, they hate themselves the most. Like, so yeah. there's just like, so many people have self-esteem issues. So it's not like comics have like that much of a higher proportion of it, but it's just more laid out there. It's more on display. And it's also like, I do comedy from a place of a lot of the stories that are very funny to me. And a lot of the things that I've said at the time were super distressful and were, agonizing things. I was talking to my buddy Eli the other day, and he said, it's weird. A lot of the times you're telling me a story and I don't realize how terrible and fucked up it is until the end because we're laughing the entire time. I'm like, yeah, I mean, and that's just, I don't like sad stuff. I don't like that how cruel and grim the world is. So I choose to look at it through a funny lens. So like, I think there's a lot of people that get in comedy for that reason. And there's, equally about the people that love and adore comedy. Like a lot of them are people that just need that humor to cope with it,
Amazing. So, it makes a lot of sense that you guys aren't more effed up than any other population. You're just, you're putting it out there for everybody to see. So
yeah,
what's going on? Tell me about the business of it. Like, I know you want to make it as a comedian, and I was heartbroken because I know you moved out here a couple of years ago to LA because we have the Comedy Store and we have the Ice House and we have, 200 open mics a week, and the ecosystem for comedy was in California. And I hate to be dark and depressive, but California, whatever, whether it was justified or not because of COVID, and we don't have to get into that, they really screwed over your industry real bad. And I know now you're back in Austin because a lot of comedians, mostly Joe Rogan, moved out of LA to move back to Austin, and that's kind of created this great flight of people out to Austin. But tell me what's going on for you for comedy and the business, and like what's working, what's not working, what's the prognosis for comedy. Either, you can talk, overall as an industry or specifically in LA or specifically in Austin, because I know you're intimately involved in all of those.
Well, so, it's a good question. Nobody really knows. Like, I don't have enough money to make enough influence on what really happens in any of those situations. But for me, like, part of the decision was, I lived in LA and Brittany lives here in Austin. And I didn't want to just keep doing a long distance relationship. And I definitely didn't want to do like a long distance marriage. And it made more sense. She has a great job and I'm a aspiring comedian. So like, it doesn't make any sense for her to move to LA, especially when it's all shut the fuck down. So I moved here as a multitude of reasons. One for her. And then also because comedy just makes sense here because places are open and there are venues that are doing some stuff and there are people making moves. And there's also just like a lot of interesting stuff, like, the average show for a comedian doesn't pay very much money. So it's not like I'm going to make, a living wage or even close to it doing book shows and stand up. And like, I'm not at a place where I should be doing that yet because I don't have enough material. Like, you need to earn the money as a comedian to do it. But what I'm doing is as much as I can to help facilitate as much of that. The idea is to get a place where I can produce a show so that I have the ability to, control the content, cater the content, choose. I have taste in what I think is funny. And I want to find people that also think that same kind of stuff is funny and bring them reliable new people and build up a show and a culture and an idea around a show. I started doing that in LA with a show called Party Words, where I wanted to build a party culture. I wanted it to be like you were at a friend's house where everybody was drinking, but you were also playing a game together because I've had so much fun doing that. So I wanted a drinking game show with crazy zany characters and insanely awesome like people. And so I was paying comedians really well to do that show because that's what I wanted to build there. So like for the business side of it, it's to build that, to find a way that I can sustain that financially by doing something during the day. And, for me, it's a lot of odds, this, that, and the other just to try and make ends meet and being grateful to have an awesome wife. But, that's the business side of it, is trying to build something that brings income, because outside of selling albums and touring and selling tickets and making a percentage of ticket sales, like comedy doesn't really pay shit. And, all the people that, that are ultra rich comedians, they didn't make the mass of their wealth from being like Jerry Seinfeld made his money from the TV show. Like he didn't make it from doing stand-up comedy, the people that make, the big giant chunks of change are the people that have a lot of other stuff going on and have movies and TV and have years of ticket sales and are independent. There's people that are doing stuff outside of just comedy to make money. Because, like in anything, if you want to be super successful, you have to diversify.
Yeah, it feels kind of like tennis, where like, I don't know, if the top 3 tennis players in the world knocked on my front door, I would probably know who they are and they make millions of dollars and they have all the sponsorships and they have all the accolades. The 7th best tennis player in the world, who's a complete fucking badass, I would have no clue who that is. I don't even know if it's a man or a woman. I don't know. Maybe women beat men in tennis at the level above the top 3. I have no clue. So it's weird how I'm sure, like so many industries, 90% of the revenue is going to what? The top 1/10 of 1/10 of 1%. And to your point, Dave Chappelle's like the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So he probably should be making the lion's share of the money. But the ecosystem of money in the comedian world, from what you've told me, is not well diversed. It's not exactly a socialized environment. Socialist environment.
Yeah, and people, from the outside from the outside looking in, like there's so many people from the business world that say, well, why don't you start an app? Or, why don't you do something where you can, have a Uber Eats of comedy, or do something that's like Cameo for comedy, or, how do you monetize your comedic skill in some kind of microtransaction way where you can make a little bit of money and scale that? Like, how do you do that? And that's just that's not what comedy is. Like there are people that are trying to do that, but Cameo isn't people coming up with genius fucking cameos most of the time. Like it's a celebrity saying the thing you want them to say. When you have a comedian come and do a roast, and you pay these comedians, or a corporate comedian, they come and do jokes about the specific thing. Like there's people that make their living do that, but it's not funny unless you're inside that circle and you get all of those things. And that person worked a long time to make that specific corporate style of humor that works with those group of people, and learned and honed that specific craft. Like if you want to go all into figuring out how to make personalized custom clips, like somebody can do that. There's all these kids now that do amazing TikToks and like all this awesome shit you see on Reddit and Instagram. Like there's amazing content out there, but like it's not comedy. Like to pursue getting good at stand-up comedy, you just have to do a lot of stand-up comedy, and there's not some like shortcut or way that you can make money around it, because stand-up comedy is still mostly run by stand-up comedians. Like it's the people booking shows are other comics. Like until you're at a very high level, like everybody you talk to about being on shows is a comedian themselves that's just trying to make it. Like everybody is just trying to make it and trying to help each other make it and trying to make sure their show is good. And some people are out there just trading spot for spot. They have a show so they can put people on their show to get on other shows. And there's some people that are trying to build a culture. And like you can tell because of the longevity and how quality they are and how hard they are to get on. If you can get on a show super easy, it's probably not a very good show unless you're really fucking good. So like, there's a lot to it. Behind the scenes of what it takes to even just do comedy.
Dude, this is so funny. When I saw you the first time perform at the Comedy Store up in the Belly Room, it was, I don't know that ecosystem, so I showed up and we grabbed a drink and we were talking with the bartender, and then I'm habitually early, so I showed up early and got in line, and then I was shooting the shit with the doorman, and then it was this situation where it's like, okay, we get in the room, we're gonna see the comedians. And one of the comedians was the organizer of the event, and one of the comedians was the doorman, and one of the comedians was the bartender, and then there was 2 or 3 other comedians. It was like, oh, these people, and then I figured it out pretty quickly. I'm like, these people are working effectively for free just to get a shot at doing their 5 minutes in front of 50, 60, 70 people, because it's the Comedy Store, right? And if you can put it on your resume that you performed at the Comedy Store, that's a big deal. So I think this would be funny. What are all the odd jobs that you've done, or you've heard other comedians do, or you've heard, the high earners of the world, the Chappelles, the Seinfelds? What are all the shit jobs that comedians do to make ends meet so that they can stay in the world of comedy and make it happen?
I mean, there's no list to the end of jobs that comedians have done. There's a bunch of them that work at Trader Joe's, and there's a bunch of people that have jokes about their job at Trader Joe's. I've seen there's a comedian like that most people haven't heard of, but is a fucking awesome, super hilarious guy, Bruce Gray. Bruce Gray is fucking hilarious, but he's just not like an hour-long headliner guy that goes around touring. So people haven't heard of him a lot unless they've seen him before. So like someone like him, he's super fucking funny. But I remember he posted on Instagram that he had opened for Theo Von in Las Vegas to a sold out crowd, and then had to drive back to work at, I think it was like Corner Bakery in downtown LA. And he had to pull an all-nighter to be able to go from doing this awesome, like life-changing, super resume building experience so that he could go back and work at his job at a bakery. And it's like, you think about like coming off the high of something like that, and then you go back to your fucking job where you're like, you want a large coffee? Great. Like, thank you so much. So like, there's no list of jobs. And the crazy stuff you do to try and do comedy. There's just shit venues that you do. I've done the back of there was a place that was like a steak restaurant called something like Rib Trader. And there's just 3 like 80-foot long tables with like a seat on each side. So people have to sit across from each other, like some weird banquet thing. And there's a lady on an oxygen tank on the left-hand side, like sitting there with her oxygen tank, just like the entire time. And then like the lighting's not super great in the audience, so I can't see until I get on stage and start to do my jokes that the kids in the middle part are pretty young looking. And I don't have great vision, and I didn't know exactly how young. So I start telling them how to buy drugs and like how to pick their hookers and like this, like, you know, like, hey, I'm the crazy uncle that gives you advice. And then I get off and I found out they were like 13, 14 years old. I was like, oops. Oh, that table over there that looked mad about it, that was their parents. That would make sense why they were upset about those jokes. You know, I've done stuff like that. I did a weed festival. This guy just died of COVID, of all things. He was diabetic. He had he lost 2 legs to it. Joe El Cholo, the comedian, he was on a show with me, and we were in Adelanto, California, which hopefully you haven't heard of. It's in the desert, and there's a baseball stadium there, and there was a weed festival put on by some company that was like, we love weed. So we go out to this festival, and I got to bring someone with me, and I brought my friend Adam Martinez, and Joe El Cholo brought another guy who was just like basically a stereotypical cholo. He wore like a tall white tee, like Dickies jean shorts, like knee-high white socks, and the Nike Cortezes, and had neck tattoos all the way up to here, and a shaved head and a mustache. Like, it was not like he was like, yes, that's who I am. And then he just get up and did like 10 minutes of jokes like that. They did okay. My buddy, so let me tell you more. So it's a baseball stadium. It's like 105 degrees. And then there's like a bunch of just people that are high as shit. They wanted us to perform on the field in the sun to people that were standing in the shade, like back behind the back row. And I was like, hey, you can't have 150 feet between me and the crowd, even if I'm on the speakers. Like, that's not going to work for comedy. Like, none of us are going to do good. And he was like, well, we can wait a little bit longer, but you won't get to go on at 4:20. And we're like, yeah, none of us care about going on at 4:20. Like, that was just a gimmick for the show. Like, can we do comedy inside an air conditioning so people aren't dying? He's like, yeah, we have to wait till this panel finishes. I'm like, I wonder what kind of panel they have at a weed festival. It's a recidivism panel. It's a bunch of people that work at jails and in job industries to help people that got felonies for weed charges use their weed knowledge in the world where it's now legal. So it's a bunch of people that just spent a bunch of time in jail and prison for their weed charges. So a bunch of criminals, but not bad people, just criminals. And like, once you've been to jail or prison, it changes you. So there's all of them in the crowd, and then 4 very old white guys on the table just like telling them how to get jobs. And we had to wait for that to finish so that we could do comedy there. So most of them stayed. And then we had like a few other these potheads kind of wander in. First Cholo guy goes up, he's like funny, they do okay. Adam goes up, it goes okay. Joe El Cholo goes up. He does all like Cholo humor as well, but he does it with puppets, and he destroys. They were supposed to do 10 minutes, each was supposed to do 10. I was going to do 20. Joe is up there at 10, and I'm like, just let him keep going. I don't even need to perform. He's fucking murdering. Like, just let him go until he's done. He does 20 minutes, and then the host, this guy, is like, all right, man, you ready to go? And I was like, I mean, I guess. Like, I'll do my best. Like, I got some, I'll try. I don't know if they're gonna like anything as much as they love that shit, but we'll try it. Like, I'm here to do comedy. And then he brings me up and he says, your next comedian is also a probation officer. For no reason. Just throws that in there into my fucking intro. I'm like, hey guys, to be very clear, I'm not like, and I'm not just like lying. I think if I'm a cop, I have to tell you I'm a cop. I don't know if those are the rules, but also I'm saying cop a lot, and cops don't say cop. Fuck 12. Like, you know, I got back on the other side, but like, it's just such a, like, that's their first impression is they think I'm a cop. And it's like, you know, it just was not like a great gig for me. But I drove 2.5 hours out to that gig with the promise of being paid in like a weed goodie bag, which I thought was just like a bunch of weed. During the event, he gave us like 3 or 4 joints of just like skank shitty dirt weed that like I didn't even want to smoke because it hurt my throat, and I'm a snob. So like, you know, I'm like, all right, cool. I hope we get our goodie bag. And then the dude is like, hey, sorry, I got nothing for you. So I just drove all that way just to get to do that set in that situation for $0 and 0 cents. And I spent, you know, probably $40 on gas.
Oh man. All right. So that probably goes down as the worst show that you've been conned into doing. What's the best show that you've done?
Man, that's tough. There's been like a lot of real highlights. One of my absolute favorite shows of all time. There's actually a clip of online, and that's probably why it's one of my favorites. I was in Portland, Oregon, doing my first like traveling comedy festival, the Portland Comedy Festival. It's fucking awesome, and I'm going there to do this, and then one of the guys at the show likes my set, and he's like, "Hey, I run the show in this little town. If you're willing to drive 45 minutes, I'd love to have you on it." I'm like, "All right, I'll do that. Whatever." Me and another comedian drive up there to do it. Turns out it's in this little bitty mountain town, and you got to drive up a mountain, and like halfway up the mountain you just lose reception, and then you get up to the top of this mountain, there's just one bar, and the entire fucking town comes out to this bar once a week to watch this comedy show. And because they're in the middle of nowhere, they fucking love you for being there. So I go up there, and for like 10 minutes every joke is just destroying. Like I'm having to pause for laughter breaks because people are just dying laughing. So like that's definitely one of my favorites, because it's, like a whole town of people just loving the shit out of what I'm doing. I remember being super terrified and nervous. The guy before me is killing real hard. You always get nervous you're going to get buried. Like he's going to do so good, they're going to be tired of laughing for a minute. And then I went up there and I just went on top of that. It was just like, wow, and just like alley-oop that shit, destroyed. And it was such a good feeling. And knowing I had it on like high def film, like it was just all around like a really great feeling. Interesting thing about that, like I did all my jokes, and the host of the show and his wife are the nicest fucking people. And right after I get off stage, he goes, "Hey man, great job." He goes, "Hey, my wife said she thought she heard you say the N-word." And I was like, "What?" And you're in such like a high place after doing that. You're like, "Did I?" And like, "I know I didn't. I have no way I would say that." I didn't at all. I have no idea what she heard at all. I've listened to that tape hundreds of times, watched it so many times. Nothing at all even remotely sounds like it. But just to like go from like the I just fucking murdered, feeling good, walking off stage, and he says like, "Good job," and he's like, "Did you say that?" You're like
To be like, we're going to kill you in the parking lot.
Oregon racist?
We're going to kill you in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's your fear. But yeah, that's one of the best ones for sure.
What's your expectation going forward? Like, I mean, we don't have to get into the politics and the craziness of it, but obviously you moved from California to Texas. Texas is a little bit more liberal about the masks and the lockdown, and I don't know, maybe everything's open up there, but what's your expectation for comedy for the future? Is this a silver lining that all the other comedians that are kind of at the same place that you are going to fall out? Or is it going to tighten the competition because everybody's just home doing nothing but writing jokes? Like, what's your crystal ball say about the future of comedy for you personally?
I mean, like, if you love comedy the way I love comedy, like, the pandemic's not going to stop you from comedy. So, there's a lot of people that are waiting to get back at it, and there's a lot of really talented people that are just waiting to get back at it that I'm sure have been writing awesome shit. And it's like riding a bike. Once you get the rust off, like, you're pretty good to go again. I don't know what the future is, because I don't know what's going to keep happening with lockdowns and them changing and curfews and this, that, and the other until the vaccine's out there and we can open shit up all the way again. Then it's a free for all, and Austin's going to be the wild, wild west because Rogan's going to open a comedy club, and there's a lot of people that are working. The Cap City Comedy Club has been open forever and is like a famous institution and is like universally beloved by traveling comedians. They shut down at the beginning of the pandemic, so there's a hole there for that. There's some controversy around one of the bookers who does one of the main rooms downtown. He had some he turns out he did some pretty bad stuff, and so like a lot of people don't want to work with him. So there's going to be a bunch of shit there, and you never know, because he's a straight white dude. Like he might just get away with it. Sometimes that shit just blows over if you're popular enough. Not usually in a town like Austin. Like they tend to like, and comedy's really good about policing their own. Like when people do shitty stuff, like it gets called out and we take care of it. But there's no telling what's going to happen until everything opens up. But I can tell you, like, there's going to keep being, cool shows. And like, I would just urge people, anybody that sees this, like, just to take a chance and go and see some version of the comedy, because they're dying to make people laugh just as much as you're dying to like laugh and feel good again. Like as much as you miss like all the normal shit for you, like we miss it too. We want to talk to you about it. We got some funny stuff to say. Some of it's going to be shitty too. And just appreciate that, like, every time you see a comedian do shitty, know that like, unless they're like a true sociopath, like they also know that they did shitty and probably are like sitting in a parking lot somewhere just crying and listening to how shitty they did over and over and over and over again. So like if you ever see someone bomb, like even if it's uncomfortable for you, know that it's so much worse for them.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen with comedy. No one knows.
No one knows. What did I forget to ask you about Mike Eaton, comedy, your life? We can go any direction you want. Like, you're a pretty cerebral guy. Getting to know a bunch of comedians because of you, I can tell everybody that almost every comedian that I've met that can make me laugh is also hyper intelligent and has some very strong opinions about everything in life. So what else is like kind of tickling your fancy right now? What are you reading about on Reddit? What are you into, man? We haven't caught up in a while.
Like my life has been pretty consumed by just trying to, figure out when I can do comedy and then try and find a job. And then also just like loving the married life. Like it's the best shit ever. Like I know I told you this on the phone the other day, but like, because I'm unemployed, like looking for work and my wife's like a badass bitch, like I'm essentially a house husband. Like I love it. I have no idea why anyone doing this would ever want it to stop. This is awesome. I vacuum, I cook, I do grocery shopping, I clean stuff. It's awesome, Scott. Like, it's awesome. Like I don't know. It's very interesting because I grew up so much in the South, and like growing up, like even like dates going on when I was younger, like the thought of a girl trying to even split it with me is just like, I would like throw up from the anxiety about it. And like, it just, so being in this position, it's like a weird, like a vulnerable switch to be in, but like, I love it. I love, like, yeah, it's the best life. And so, yeah, like I'm really just enjoying like that. And, also like the cool part, I met my wife in like August of 2020. We got married in the end of October of 2020. So like, we're also like still getting to know all sorts of dope shit about each other. So like, that's like fun. I mean, that's what I do a lot of the time. That's what a lot of my day is doing. Just awesome shit with her and finding out that like we both hate the Beatles. I know you love them, but we both are just like, our favorite Beatles, Ringo Starr, because he is the best one, because he didn't give a shit about music. It was like the second best drummer in the Beatles. Like just finding out that kind of stuff about people is awesome, and getting to do adventures. She is like a food genius. Like she's just like the Pandora for like taste. So you're like, hey, I like these things. You probably know this about me, but I'm like a pretty picky eater. Like, there's a lot of shit I don't like, and like I just eat like a lot of shitty junk food. I've got like bougie taste and like fancy shit, but like for the most part, like I'm good with like mac and cheese on French fries kind of thing. She's gotten me to eat stuff that I swore I'd never, like I hated onions my whole life. She's gotten me to eat onions. Like she's tricked me into eating pickles one time. I fucking hate pickles. Weren't that bad. I eat vegetables all the time, Scott. It's crazy. Like just getting to do like all that's like, I don't know why. If I had met her sooner, like my life would be so much better. I would be like a happy, healthy, fit, like normal person. Like it's crazy what like having like someone outside of yourself to care about like does for your like priorities.
All right. I appreciate all that, and I am super happy for you at a very deep, genuine level. And I love that you're still in the honeymoon stage. But I also know you still spend 3 hours a day on fucking Reddit and the deep web and all this stuff. Come on, give us something that you're reading about right now that's just crazy. I know you're on some tangent right now with Epstein or the Capitol building craziness that we just saw over the last couple of weeks. Like, what's some weird shit you're reading about? Because you're my go-to source for weird shit. You can't just turn into a housewife.
That's fair. I've been really into serial killers lately. And just seeing like, so there's so much like, so we found the Golden State Killer like way the fuck later, like just like recently, like we just found him, and he had been like doing that shit. Like,
wasn't he living in Kansas or something?
What?
Wasn't the Golden State Killer like living in Kansas or something? Like I remember some serial killer who was like just world renowned. They found him just like being a deacon at his church in Kansas. And I was like, what the fuck? But anyway, where did they find the Golden State Killer? Maybe I'm mixing up serial killers.
I think they've still found him just like in California. I think he was in like Oakland, but so they caught like a DNA thing that like worked again. But the thing that like blew my mind the other day, you remember the Zodiac Killer?
Yeah.
And he sent all those ciphered messages. They just now solved like 23 days, a month ago, something like that. They just now solved one of his ciphers. Like it took like people that are amazing, world-class Da Vinci Code level people, like not like Da Vinci Code, the book, but like if that was real is what I'm saying. I'm not a
right,
person
no,
who thinks Da Vinci Code is real. Some people think Da Vinci Code is real. I understand that it is a fake universe. But if those kind of people were real, like the lead guy in Da Vinci Code, these people are like Da Vinci Code guy. And they just solved it, like just the other day. And it's just like some creepy gloating shit. But just learning about like all that and like and then like you watch shows like Criminal Minds, which they take very popular and famous serial killers and they slightly edit them to make them like a story, make it really interesting. Like I've gotten really good at guessing like how people are going to kill and why they're killing. And so now I've gotten to this place where I wonder like if like the certain string of things happen, would I become a serial killer? So I've just been like reading like all this like nature versus nurture stuff because there's so much like John Wayne Gacy, the guy that was a clown that like raped and ate a bunch of children and like buried them in like his like basement of his house. He was a clown and a construction worker. But the lady that did, after they killed him, they did like an autopsy of his brain and like went layer by layer. She spent 300 hours going through his brain and was like, it's a completely normal brain. And it was like, my professional opinion is that murder is just a choice. And then you meet people that talk about like the behavioral side of it. And then like some of the things about like certain parts of the brain being bigger or smaller. And like the medulla oblongata, if that's smaller, that controls like emotional regulation. So like they find in like a larger percentage of serial killers, they have like a smaller one of those or decreased blood flow to it or whatever. So there's like a bunch of interesting shit. And it's like, then I think about like veterans go and murder people, or not murder, but the patriots. And you know, like when you kill people in war, like that's still taking a human life. Like even if it's for duty, for for service, you've gone through basic training, which is to strip you of a lot of your humanity so that you can be useful in war. Like if you are worried about shooting and killing a civilian because like you don't want to hurt anybody, you're a terrible fucking soldier. So like, you know, then you wonder like, why do we do all this stuff? We're like intentionally training people to just like flip out. And so I just think about like, it's crazy that we don't have more serial killers. Like I'm just grateful that most of the time, like the manifestation of the veterans is like a homeless guy that asks me for change and doesn't like use his awesome training to stab and run through the city, evading arrest by killing people. Like, so I've been thinking a lot about murder, Scott. That's what I've been reading a lot about is murder.
Dude, I gotta tell you, maybe Chris can look this up. The actor that played John Wayne Gacy in the made-for-TV movie, I cannot remember what his name was. He played Tommy Boy's dad, who died at a heart attack at the beginning of the movie Tommy Boy. And that actor freaked me out so bad in that movie that I literally could not watch another movie with him. Like, I remember when I went to the theater to see Tommy Boy, I was like, ooh, that's his dad. Like, I almost left Tommy Boy, which I'm glad I didn't because it was an epic, hilarious movie. But he did such an awesome job of playing that part. And when he was dressed up in the clown and he was enticing women and kids back to him, I was like, oh, this is so disturbing. I don't know why my parents let me watch this shit when I was a teenager. Maybe they were trying to freak me out here.
Are we talking about To Catch a Killer, TV miniseries 1992?
Probably. Who is the actor that played John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer? Because it freaked me out so bad. Like, just seeing that guy in another movie is enough to, like, just make my inner child fearful of every clown. Forget it. Like, forget Stephen King. That shit is child's play compared to...
Brian Dennehy?
Yeah, Brian Dennehy. Oh, God. When Brian Dennehy, like him in that clown suit, I was fucking terrified for days. I think I slept on my parents' floor in their bedroom because I'm like, there's a serial killer who's a clown who's going to come kill me. And when was that? When did that come out? 92? Yeah, 92. So I was 13 years old, and I was scared fucking shitless of that guy's performance. So, yeah, I'm with you.
He died this year.
Oh, he died this year? Oh, tragic.
Well... Last year.
It
doesn't feel
to
like
a serial killer dressed in a clown suit.
Oh, no, I don't think so. He was old and he was really fat and probably had diabetes. So it was probably COVID, sadly. Yeah,
good way to go.
Yeah, good way to go, I guess, at the end of your career. But that guy, I remember, I'll never forget how badly that freaked me out. Another movie that freaked me out, and I want to hear what movies really terrified you, is what was the one? Cape Fear with Robert De Niro, the remake of Cape Fear with Robert De Niro, where you'll enjoy this since you're in the whole serial killer. Cape Fear is a great movie about Robert De Niro is this horrific, hardened criminal, and he finds out when he's in prison, he like self-educates, he gets his legal degree. He finds out that his lawyer buried some evidence that could have got him off. But the lawyer, trying to do the wrong thing legally, but the right thing morally, buried the evidence and sent him to prison, Robert De Niro to prison for 20 years. He gets out of prison, and there's some of the creepiest scenes in that movie because he starts trying to like molest, I guess is the right word, or attract Juliette Lewis-Dreyfus, who's supposed to be like this high school age girl, to come with him. And there's these super creepy scenes. If you and your wife want to be fucking freaked out, watch the remake of Cape Fear with Robert De Niro tonight. It'll blow your mind. You will probably have to double check all the locks on your doors several times. So go ahead and watch that movie.
Oh, no, we will be watching 90 Day Fiance because it's the greatest, most awful trash of all time.
Amazing.
They're the worst human beings, and I love them so much.
I am so proud of myself that I haven't watched a full episode of that, but I have seen many clips thanks to my wife. All right, Mike, you tell me the reasons why you hate and love 90 Day Fiance, and then I'll tell you the reasons that I love and hate them. And I've seen a bunch of clips thanks to my wife. Thankfully, I'm proud to say I've never watched a full episode, but tell me why you hate or love 90 Day Fiance.
It's always the same setup. There's always like some very obvious angle that they're working. Like it's always old dude in America, hot young lady from another country, or old big lady in America, like dude in Lagos, Nigeria. Like it's like young, like kind of successful lady in America, dude in some like terrible country that like she's sending a bunch of money so he can have Wi-Fi. Like there's always something. And like 90% of the time, the whole family is like, hey, this is not a good idea. And the person's like, love is love. And the premise of the show, if people don't know this, is that they get them into America on a K-1 visa where you have 90 days to wed, or they get kicked out of the country and they can't come back. So all these people have agreed to have their relationship. So there's already something suspect there where they're like, we want to have the 90 days of our relationship filmed. I found out they get paid $1,500 an episode, $2,500 an episode for the tell-all at the end where they go back and talk about what happened. But like, there's always just like crazy scandalous shit. And you can tell like a lot of it is like played up for the camera. But like, if you can imagine like having an argument with your wife about something where you're frustrated about some shit, now imagine it with all of those lights that you have aimed at you right now and like 4 cameras and also no privacy. Like, you know, like every single disagreement. Horrible. And then they're going to be like, yeah, like, so that's the whole dynamic of like every one of these relationships is there's 2 people that are just narcissistic enough to want to be on TV for that and are in some kind of relationship where there's like obviously some angle to doubt it. And sometimes they work out. And like, that's why you go into it watching it. You're like, I hope it's love, but it's probably not. And like, they're such genius, evil pieces of shit. The way they edit this, they'll tease you with a 30-second fucking clip in episode 1. They'll be like, this episode, this shit happens with this couple. And you're like, no fucking way he said that. And then it'll show up 6 episodes later, completely out of context. You're like, well, that wasn't that bad. And it's like, you fucks, you made me watch 5.5 hours of basically her parents hate his family. And it's like, like it's garbage trash. And I love it, hate it, and so much. So much.
Man, my wife.
Why do you love hate it?
My wife is gonna kill me. Well, let me tell you a story real quick, and then I'll tell you why I love hate it. My wife is gonna kill me for telling you this story publicly. So when I was in my 20s, I was working out at this gym. I was doing some boxing. I don't even remember if we were doing jiu-jitsu, but the gym was owned by a guy who I won't use his name because he's still kind of on the circuit. He's a jiu-jitsu commentator. He fought in the UFC and whatnot. And I was working out at his gym. And he found out that I used to wrestle in high school. And by the way, this is when I was in my 20s, like 50, 60 pounds ago, and I was in way better shape. And I was only a couple of years removed from the Army and wrestling in high school in the Army. So he found out that I wrestled. So he came up and he's like, hey, man, I'm a little guy, 130, 140 pounds. And you're a bigger dude. You're 170, 180 pounds. I just need somebody to like get a sweat going and work out. Will you wrestle with me and I'll do jujitsu? And I promise I just won't finish any moves. Like I won't break your elbow or your wrist. I'm like, all right, cool. Like you're going to give me a free gym membership. I just come in on Saturdays and roll around with you. And he's like, yeah, sure. So I proceeded to like roll around for many, many Saturdays in a row. And the dude was so much smaller than me and would just beat my ass over and over and over again because he knew jujitsu and I didn't. And his wife was a lovely lady. They were all from Brazil, of course, because it was jujitsu in the early 2000s. And so he finally came to me one day and he's like, hey, Scott, and his accent was all fucked up. He's like, my wife's looking to get her sister here to the country. And you're not a bad looking dude. And you seem like you got your shit together and you work at a bank and you seem like a normal dude. How about we pay you $25,000 to marry my sister-in-law? And we'll give you, I can't remember what it was, $600, something like that. We'll give you some monthly stipend and you got to stay married to her for 2 years. And, like I said, you're not bad looking. So she'll probably cook and clean and maybe a little on the side if you guys hit it off. And I'm like, nah, my mom would never forgive me. Like, I just can't imagine breaking the law. I was quite the Boy Scout in my 20s. And so then proceed to work out for like six more months with him. She got to the country somehow. I don't know. Either she married somebody or she got some other type of visa. And she walked into the gym one day, and I was like, I might have just made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, this girl was drop dead gorgeous, straight off the Brazilian Express, like curves in all the right places. I met her, and she was a lovely human being. And I was like, luckily, I did do amazing years later with my wife. But I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I might never do better than this. And not only will I never do better than this, they were going to pay me to do this well. And I'm like, I just F that up at a high level. So that's my funny story about arranged marriages and the 90-day visa.
You can say fuck that up after you tell that story. It's not like you that was like more palatable because you're like, I really effed that up.
Oh, no, I fucked that up royally.
$25,000 to fuck this hot chick.
Fucked that up royally in my 20s. Luckily it ended up okay for me. But yeah, the thing that I hate about 90 Day Fiance is it's like, we watched this one episode. I don't know. This lady gets off the plane and she's like, no flowers, no chocolate, no car. And I'm just like, first of all, this is reinforcing the stereotype that every guy can only be a bad husband if they show up to the airport every time with flowers and candy. And I've never shown up to the airport ever for any girlfriend or my wife with flowers or candy. So that just pisses me off. And then, I don't know, the thing that kind of bothers me at my root is like a bunch of these dudes where I've seen these clips. This is going to sound obnoxious. They're not even that rich. It's like they showed some dude who was like living in Vegas and like his prized possession was like his $2,000, I don't know, slot machine or something. I'm like, this guy lives in track housing in like Vegas. He probably makes $50,000 a year, which is no problem. That's a great living for a lot of Americans. But I'm like, this is not the dude you marry if you're marrying for money and a visa. Like, come on, you're supposed to find some Jeff Bezos type guy and get him to divorce his wife and be a hot Latina who's looking for a visa because clearly that worked. And it's just crazy.
There is one of those.
There is one.
I don't remember. So that one that you're talking about, his name is Colt and her name is Larissa.
I cannot believe you remember this. This is so amazing.
She calls him Colty. No, the reason I remember it is because the thing she says is he shows up at the baggage claim. Also, this dude is fat. He looks like if Cole Strange gained 150 pounds. Like, that is 100% what the guy looked like. And so he shows up and he's got fucking like D cups in his like golf shirt that he wears to be a software engineer at some shitty place driving like an 86 Corolla. And he shows up to pick up this girl from Brazil that's just like, she's got those fucking horse gums that just come like halfway down her teeth. And she wears these tight dresses where she thinks she's hot. But what definitely happened, they were in Mexico and he was like all drunk and she was like just looking for a visa. And he was like pretending to be rich and like lied and said all this stuff. And you watch the relationship and find out that like he was just acting like a baller. And then she gets there and has to live with him and his mom in this shitty house in Henderson. It's not even in Vegas. And like, so what she says when he shows up, Colty, where's my flowers? And me and my wife say that shit to each other all the time because it's so fucking funny. And like, she's the worst. But there was a dude in Connecticut that was like a wine entrepreneur, made fucking bank. And I can't remember if this chick was from like South America or like the Philippines, but she was 20 and he's like 43. And his kids are like the sweetest ever. Max and Cece are the kids' names. But they're like younger kids. The kid looks like a little me. He's like a little chubby smartass. And like they're like 10 and 6 and she's like 20 or 22 or something like that. And so it's like they're pretty close to her age. And then she becomes like best friends with his ex-wife. And like there's a whole argument over a prenup and all this stuff. And then like he decides not to get a prenup and you're like, you did get the fucking prenup. What are you doing? And like it, you never know how it goes. And like you can also Google and find out if these people are still married. That's part of the fun. So like, I don't know. I recommend everybody sit down, do your drug of choice, and then watch 90 Day Fiance.
All right, I'm going to try it with my wife. I'm going to have a few drinks, have a few cigars, and then go watch 90 Day Fiance. All right, so anybody that's been even mildly offended or thought that you said something inappropriate, which we didn't even really get close to on this podcast, but if you are the type of person that gets offended, you should check out now because I'm going to ask Mike a question. I'm going to ask him to tell a story. So right now, I'm just giving you fair warning. If you were easily offended, if you don't like comedy, if you don't like sexual jokes, we enjoyed having you on the podcast. But Mike, would you grace our presidents at the end of the podcast here with telling us the cock goblin story?
Oh, man. I haven't told this story in a while. And also, I don't think Brittany has ever heard this story.
Perfect. Well, this would be a good time. Does that mean Brittany, your wife, is in the room with you right now?
She is on the couch. I'm about to cook us dinner when I get done with this, like a good house husband.
All right, so everybody should tune out now if you're easily offended. But go ahead and tell us your comedy skit, which, by the way, to this day, I don't know if this actually happened to you or if you were just so high you thought this happened to you. But go ahead and tell us the cock goblin story.
No, this all really happened. So back in my early 20s, I lived alone in Dallas. And I was just like any other dude in the early 20s, just horny, trying to get laid all the time. And there's an app, and it wasn't like Tinder or like Bumble or any of that shit that we have now. Instead of swiping, it just showed you who's online and who's close to you. And that was it. You could just say like, hey, you're online close on a woman. And I remember like this girl popped up. I'm like, she didn't look great, but she was online. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? And she was like, nothing. Do you want to hang out? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. And like, you're always a little dubious. You're like, is this a robot or a pedophile? Like, I always look like a kid, so it could be a pedophile. But I'm also a big guy. So like, I could probably beat up a pedophile. So, what's up? You want to hang out? And she's like, yeah, I'll come over. Let's fuck. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's so easy. That's the greatest thing ever. Good job. Why don't you come on over? So she's driving over, and she messaged me on the app, hey, I'm here. And so I walk out of my apartment, and then I see, and there's a Ford Mustang parked that just pulled in. And I don't know if you know this, but the Ford Mustang is the official car of obese women. That's just what they all drive. I don't know why.
If it's a convertible, it's got great leg room. If it's a Ford Mustang convertible and you live in Kansas, which I did for a while in the Army, Ford Mustang convertible is the official car of a stripper. So I feel like this could have gone either way. It could have been obese or it could have been a hot stripper.
Well, in my experience, it's always been, a Lane Bryant type of lady. So, as it turns out, she's a larger woman. She gets out of the car, and when gets out of the car, it was, like how when like a 5-year-old draws a stick figure, they're just like a head with like arms and legs coming out of it. Like she was kind of built like that. Like there wasn't so much as a neck as just like there was like a head at the top, maybe like a face at the top. So that's what gets out of the car, and like she starts like walking forward, and she doesn't have like enough clearance to take steps like you and I, so she has to kind of like do like a T-Rex waddle thing. And I'm like, oh man, this is not gonna be great. I live on the 3rd floor. There's a lot of stairs. I don't know that she's ever done a stair. So let's see how this goes. Thankfully, I also knew I had quite a bit of time. So I run inside and I take like a few shots of tequila. And I'm like, this is just gonna be one of those nights that sucks a lot. And I go down the stairs. I go to meet her. I can't even like hardly hug her, get my arms all the way around her. I'm like, oh, hello. Nice to meet you. And she's out of breath. And I'm like, are you ready for the stairs? She's looking at it like Mount Everest. I'm like, okay. So I go about halfway up the stairs. I'm sitting there with a bottle of tequila, just like taking shots and talking to her, kind of give her a motivational speech to get up. Another 15, 20 minutes. I moved to the top of the stairs. She's there on the landing, just kind of laid out like, and she's like laying there, and she kind of looks like one of those things they put out to stop jumpers out of buildings, like so they can land safely. She's laying there like one of those. And then she gets back up. She makes it up the rest of the stairs, and we finally get there. She sits on my couch. She catches her breath. I offer some water. She said no. I don't know that she's really even spoken that much. So much as just heavily breathed in my direction, like at this point. And then she finally says to me, "Hey, why don't we go to your room?" And I'm like, "All right, like it's pretty down to it. Whatever. Like I'm definitely not gonna have sex with this thing, but like I'll let it blow me. Whatever. And, like fat girls, like they give a pretty mean blowjob. They didn't get that size by not shoveling things in their face. It's not like they're gonna miss an opportunity for a feeding. It's like calories anyway. I can get them. So we go to my room, and she's like, lay down, and I lay down on the bed, and then she kneels beside the bed, and then she pulls out of her pocket like a handkerchief, like a little handkerchief, and she lays it like under my crotch, and I'm like, that's weird. Like, I don't know what that's about. Whatever. I don't know what's about to happen. And then she unzips and she starts, and she doesn't start gently. Like I'm closing my eyes thinking of a better situation. And she doesn't start like, nice to meet you. Like there was not like an introductory, like, oh, hello, penis. Like she's like right away, just like face down, just right away. And so I wasn't like trying to impress anybody. So like, 30 seconds later, I'm done. And she like goes up, she takes the handkerchief, she wipes her face, and she sticks it in her pocket, and then she just gets up and walks out. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I'm like pretty drunk, so I'm like, that's crazy. I guess she's gonna go sit on the couch or something. I don't know. So I take a minute to gather myself and get up, walk out. She's not in the living room. I'm like, all right, that's weird. I open the front door. I don't see her anywhere outside. I'm like, well, that's fucking weird. I go back inside. She's not in the bathroom. I'm like, all right, she's definitely not in my apartment. And I walk out and I look, and her fucking car is gone. I'm like, there's no fucking way. It took her like 3 hours to get up those stairs. There's no way she jumped down them and rolled to safety. Like, what? Where did she possibly go? And then I like, and her car's gone. So then I go to the message app to be like, hey, is everything okay? Like, you're not gonna like freak out and go spit that in a jar and make babies with it or something. Like, what is going on here? And I go to message her in the app, and she's gone from the app completely. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And that's when it dawned on me. I ran into like a mythical creature. It's a cock goblin. And they're just these fat mythical creatures. They live in a cave somewhere, and every 6 months they come out to feed on a sad guy's cum. And they bring like a nice handkerchief, like it's like a 5-star restaurant. They sit down, they have their meal, and they disappear off into the night to wait another 6 months. So that's the cock goblin.
And that is the story you can expect to hear. The type of story you can expect to hear if you go to a Mike Eaton comedy special. All right, man. I know you got to get back to your wife and you got to cook dinner. You got to go be a good housewife. Anything else we got to close on? Anything else we need to know about comedy, or any words of encouragement for all this craziness that's going on in the world and politics and COVID and in the United States right now?
I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, like right after saying like a terrible, heinous story like that, but like, I don't know. I feel like everybody should take a second, check in and see how they're feeling about what they're doing. Make sure they're doing the thing that they want to be doing. Because I think a lot of people are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. And not a lot of people get an opportunity to do what they want to do. And that's been one of the greatest gifts of comedy, is getting to do something and pursue something that I love to do. And I just feel like everybody should have that opportunity. So I would just encourage everybody to take a moment, check in, and make sure they love what they're doing.
That's awesome, man. I love you to death, bro, even when you tell wildly inappropriate stories. So I can't wait to get you out to here to LA to see the little podcast studio that we've set up and do this live. Me and you will do like 3 hours of, we'll smoke different things and we'll talk about some real cerebral stuff, and we'll have a few drinks and we'll have Cole over and have a nice big political fight. But I appreciate you being on, man. I love you lots.
Thank you for having me, Scott. I love you too, man. I really appreciate you.
Talk to you soon.
I'll see you soon. All right. Take care.